At his wedding, my son said, "Please don't sit near my wife's family. You look poor." Something inside me cracked that night, like an old, brittle vase shattering on cold hardwood floor. I remember standing there in my faded dress, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter swirling around me, but all I could feel was the echo of my own loneliness. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share, and if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning, I wake up in my small Queens apartment on 37th Avenue, where the elevated train rumbles past my window like a metal heartbeat. The distant hum of the city mixes with the stale scent of leftover Chinese takeout from the restaurant downstairs. My routine has become endless and empty, preparing breakfast that no one will eat, drinking lukewarm coffee alone at a table set for one, waiting for a phone call that rarely comes. The chair opposite me sits empty now, just like the space my son has slowly pushed me out of his life. That red vinyl chair where he used to sit as a boy, swinging his legs while telling me about his day at public school 163. Now it's covered with junk mail and old newspapers, a monument to abandonment. I remember the day the wedding invitation came. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March, delivered by our mailman Carlos, who's been walking this route for 15 years. The envelope was thick and expensive, cream-colored with embossed gold lettering that caught the afternoon light streaming through my kitchen window. "Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Pierce request the honor of your presence," it read. Jonathan Pierce. My son had legally changed his last name from mine, Rodriguez, to his wife's family name 6 months earlier. I held that invitation in my trembling hands, imagining my son happy and excited, finally settling down with someone who loved him. But reality crashed over me like a cold wave when I realized I was being invited not as his beloved mother, but as a character in some elaborate social theater where I didn't belong. The sweet smell of jasmine from my old garden in Astoria still haunts me. I can close my eyes and remember tending those plants while Jonathan played in our small backyard, his laughter mixing with the sound of Mrs. Chen's television next door. I remember the photographs on my mantle, faded Polaroids of us at his elementary school plays, birthday parties with homemade cakes, our modest Thanksgiving dinners where I'd stretch a small turkey to feed whoever needed a place to go. The contrast between those warm memories and the cold marble of that wedding venue in Manhattan hit me like a physical blow. The Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue, a place where afternoon tea costs more than I spend on groceries in a week. I knew from the moment I walked through those revolving doors that I was entering a world where my presence was not just unwelcome, but embarrassing. I spent 38 years shaping my son's world with my bare hands. I can still feel the texture of his torn school clothes under my fingertips as I mended them by lamplight after my shift at the office building in Midtown. "Mom, can you help me with my science project?" he would ask, his eyes bright with possibility. "Of course, mijo," I would say, though I was bone-tired from cleaning floors until midnight. I lost count of the meals I ate standing up in that tiny kitchen, reheating my dinner after making sure he had eaten his fill. I lost count of the nights I fell asleep in the hard wooden chair next to his bed, when he had nightmares or fever. When money was tight, which was most of the time, I would swallow my pride and ask my supervisor for extra shifts, scrubbing toilets and emptying trash bins in those gleaming Manhattan office towers, so Jonathan could attend the after-school math program at the community center. The other mothers would arrive to pick up their children in clean cars, wearing clothes that didn't smell like industrial disinfectant. I would show up on the subway, my hands still raw from cleaning chemicals, but Jonathan never seemed to notice. Or maybe he did notice, and that's when the shame began to take root in him. I forgave every hurt along the way. The resentful teenage years when he would slam his bedroom door and scream that he hated our apartment, hated our neighborhood, hated being poor. "Why can't we live like normal people?" he would shout. "Why don't you ask Dad for help?" The words would slice through me because his father had vanished when Jonathan was 3, leaving behind nothing but empty beer bottles and unpaid bills. "I am your dad and your mom," I would whisper to myself after these fights, biting my tongue until I could taste blood. "I am everything you have, and somehow it's not enough." In those dark moments, Doubts would pierce through my exhaustion like needles. Was I just a stepping stone in his life? An unpaid debt waiting to be discarded once he climbed high enough on the social ladder? The thought would make me sick to my stomach, but I would push it away and focus on getting him through another day, another year, another milestone. When Jonathan graduated from Queen's College with his business degree, I used my entire inheritance from my mother, $3,000 that had been sitting in a savings account for emergencies, to buy him a suit for job interviews. A gray wool suit from Macy's that made him look like the successful man I always knew he could become. "You didn't have to do that, Ma," he said, but his eyes were bright with gratitude as he looked at himself in the mirror. For a moment, I saw my little boy again, the one who used to tell me I was the most beautiful woman in the world. I wanted to, I told him, and I meant it. Every dollar I had ever spent on him, every sacrifice I had made, every dream of mine I had set aside, it was all worth it to see him happy. But happiness, I learned, can be a moving target. The more successful Jonathan became, the more distant he grew from our little apartment in Queens. His new job at an investment firm and financial district introduced him to a world of wealth I could barely imagine. He would call me occasionally to tell me about business dinners at restaurants I had never heard of, about investment opportunities in stocks and cryptocurrency that sounded like foreign languages to my ears. "Ma, you should think about investing," he would say. "Bitcoin is really taking off. You could make some real money." I would laugh, though it hurt. "Mijo, I barely have enough money to invest in groceries." The silence on the other end of the phone would stretch uncomfortably long. I could almost hear him remember where he came from and wish he could forget. The microaggressions began so slowly that I almost didn't notice them at first. Birthdays that passed without phone calls. Christmas gifts that arrived later and later each year, clearly chosen by his assistant rather than him. When I caught the flu 2 winters ago and was bedridden for a week, I waited 3 days before calling him for help. "I can't come over right now, Ma," he said, his voice distracted. "I'm in the middle of a huge deal. Can you call a cab to the doctor?" I hung up and took the subway to the emergency clinic, fever burning behind my eyes, holding onto the metal poles with hands that shook from weakness. The young doctor who examined me asked if there was someone who could check on me at home. "No," I said simply. "There's no one." The apartment felt different after that. The walls seemed thinner, like they couldn't protect me anymore. The silence between my son's phone calls stretched from days to weeks to months. I would find myself staring at the telephone, willing it to ring, rehearsing conversations in my head that would never happen. Mrs. Lopez from the apartment next door became my closest confidant, though we had never exchanged more than polite greetings in the hallway before. She was a widow too, her husband having passed from a heart attack 3 years earlier. We began sharing morning coffee on her fire escape, watching the neighborhood wake up while trading stories about children who had grown too busy for their mothers. "They love us," she would say, stirring sugar into her café con leche. "They just don't know how to show it anymore." I wanted to believe her, but doubt had taken root in my chest like a weed. When Jonathan called to tell me about his engagement, I was washing dishes in my tiny kitchen, the spring sunlight casting shadows through my faded curtains. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard since he was young. Excitement, pure and unguarded. "Her name is Catherine," he said. "She's amazing, Ma. She went to Columbia, and her family has this incredible house in the Hamptons. Her father owns a chain of luxury hotels." I felt something cold settle in my stomach as he described his fiancée's world. Private schools and ski trips to Colorado, a trust fund that would allow her to pursue her passion for art without worrying about money, a social circle that included the children of senators and CEOs. "When do I get to meet her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Another one of those uncomfortable silences. "Soon," he said finally. "We're planning the wedding for next spring. It's going to be at the Pierre. Catherine's parents are handling most of the arrangements." The Pierre Hotel. I had cleaned office buildings in the shadow of that hotel for 15 years, had walked past its elegant facade thousands of times on my way to and from work. The doormen in their pristine uniforms would nod politely as I passed, recognizing me as one of the army of invisible women who kept the city running while its wealthy inhabitants slept. "That sounds beautiful," I managed to say. I'm so happy for you, mijo. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to imagine myself in the Pierre's ornate ballroom, surrounded by people whose monthly clothing budgets exceeded my yearly income. I tried to picture conversations with Catherine's family, tried to think of what we might have in common besides loving the same man. The wedding invitation, when it finally arrived, confirmed my fears. The language was formal and distant. Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Pierce request the honor of your presence. Not, Jonathan and Catherine want their families to celebrate with them. Not even, we hope you can join us. Just the cold formality of an obligation being acknowledged. I called him that evening to thank him for the invitation. Thanks for sending the invitation, I said. It's beautiful. The Pierre. That's quite something. Yeah, Catherine's parents really went all out, he said. Listen, Ma, I wanted to talk to you about the seating arrangement. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. Okay. The thing is, Catherine's family they're used to a certain level of sophistication. And I was thinking maybe it would be better if you sat with some of our family friends rather than at the main family table. Each word hit me like a small slap. Family friends? You know, people you'd be more comfortable with. Mrs. Lopez, maybe she could come as your guest. You two get along great. I was quiet for so long that he felt compelled to fill the silence. It's not personal, Ma. It's just, I want everything to go smoothly. This is really important to Catherine's family, and I need to make a good impression on Catherine's family, I repeated slowly. What about impressing your own family? You know what I mean. But I didn't know what he meant. Or rather, I knew exactly what he meant. And it was breaking my heart into pieces so small I wasn't sure I could put them back together. I understand, I said. Though understanding and accepting are two very different things. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of humiliation and self-doubt. I went shopping for a dress at the Macy's in Elmhurst, spending money I couldn't afford on an outfit that would help me blend into the background. Navy blue and modest, with sleeves that covered my work-worn arms and a hemline that fell safely below my knees. The saleswoman, a kind Puerto Rican girl about my son's age, helped me select accessories. "This is for a special occasion?" she asked as she rang up my purchases. "My son's wedding," I said. And for a moment I felt proud again. She smiled. "How wonderful. He must be so excited to have his mother there." I nodded and managed to smile back, but the words felt hollow in my chest. 2 days before the wedding, I was walking back from the grocery store when I overheard Mrs. Chen talking to her daughter on her cell phone in the lobby of our building. She was speaking in Mandarin, but she switched to English when she mentioned Jonathan's name. "Yes, I saw him last week with his new wife. Very elegant girl. But you know, I feel bad for his mother. She wasn't even invited to the engagement party at the plaza last month. I heard about it from Mrs. Martinez. Her daughter works catering there. My bags of groceries suddenly felt impossibly heavy. An engagement party at the Plaza Hotel. Another event in my son's life that I had been carefully excluded from. I climbed the stairs to my apartment slowly, my legs weak with the weight of this new rejection. That night, I called Jonathan. "You had an engagement party?" I asked without preamble. Silence. Then, "Ma, it was just a small thing. Catherine's parents organized it. It was mostly her family and some business associates of her father's. And you didn't think to invite your own mother? It wasn't like that. It was very formal, very corporate. You would have been bored." Each excuse was another small knife sliding between my ribs. Not sophisticated enough for the family seating, too unsophisticated for the engagement party. Where exactly did I fit in my son's new life? "I wouldn't have been bored," I said quietly. "I would have been proud. Ma, please don't make this difficult. The wedding is in 2 days. Can't we just focus on that?" I wanted to ask him what I had done wrong. I wanted to demand an explanation for why the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him was now an embarrassment to be managed and minimized. But I was tired, soul-deep tired, and the fight had gone out of me. "Okay," I said. "I'll see you at the wedding." "Make sure you get there early," he said. "The ceremony starts at 4 sharp, and Catherine's family is very punctual." Catherine's family. Always Catherine's family. As if I wasn't family at all. Just some obligation he had inherited and couldn't quite figure out how to discharge. I hung up the phone and walked to my bedroom, where I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser and pulled out a shoebox filled with photographs. Pictures of Jonathan as a baby, as a toddler, as a little boy missing his front teeth. Pictures of us at the Mets game for his 10th birthday, at his high school graduation, at his college commencement. In every single photograph, he was smiling. In most of them, he was looking at me like I was the most important person in his world. When had that changed? When had I become someone he was ashamed to be seen with? I spread the photographs across my bedspread and tried to find the exact moment when love had turned to embarrassment, when pride had become shame. But the transformation had been so gradual, so carefully managed, that it was impossible to pinpoint. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before dawn with my stomach churning. I had barely slept, and when I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, I saw an old woman with tired eyes and worry lines etched deep around her mouth. This was the face that was too embarrassing to sit near Catherine's elegant family. I took a long shower and carefully applied makeup, trying to hide the evidence of my sleepless night. I put on my navy blue dress and the low heels I had bought to match, and I looked at myself one more time in the full-length mirror on the back of my bedroom door. I looked exactly like what I was, a working-class woman in her early 60s who had spent her life in service to others. My hands bore the calluses of cleaning work. My back was slightly curved from years of bending over mops and vacuum cleaners. My face showed every year of struggle and sacrifice. But for the first time in months, I stood up straighter. This was who I was. This was the woman who had loved my son unconditionally, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for his education, who had cheered louder than anyone else at his graduations and achievements. If that wasn't good enough for his new family, then perhaps the problem wasn't with me. The subway ride to Manhattan felt longer than usual. I sat in the corner of the train car, watching the familiar neighborhoods of Queens give way to the gleaming towers of Midtown. Other passengers got on and off, construction workers heading home from night shifts, nurses beginning their morning rounds, cleaning women like myself, starting another day of invisible labor that kept the city functioning. I thought about the vast sums of money that changed hands in the buildings I had cleaned over the years. Stock transactions worth millions of dollars, investment portfolios that included Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, worth more than entire neighborhoods in Queens. I had scrubbed the floors of offices where single deals generated enough profit to feed my family for decades. But none of that wealth had ever trickled down to the woman who emptied their trash cans and sanitized their bathrooms. The Pierre Hotel loomed before me like a golden castle when I emerged from the subway at Fifth Avenue. The doorman, impeccable in his burgundy uniform, held the door open for me with a slight bow. I wondered if he recognized me from the countless times I had walked past this building on my way to work, but his expression was professionally neutral. Inside, the lobby was a study in tasteful opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light on marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. Fresh flowers arranged in vases, probably worth more than my monthly rent, filled the air with their perfume. Well-dressed guests moved through the space with the confident ease of people who belonged in such places. I followed the discreet signs directing wedding guests to the cotillion room, my footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. The ballroom was even more magnificent than I had imagined. Soaring ceilings with ornate molding, enormous windows draped in silk, round tables covered in crisp white linens and adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces. And there, near the back of the room, was my table. Table 14, tucked behind a pillar where it would be nearly invisible to the head table where the bride and groom would sit. My name card was written in the same elegant calligraphy as all the others, but its placement spoke volumes about my status in this celebration. Mrs. Lopez had arrived before me, elegant in a dress she had clearly bought special for the occasion. She smiled when she saw me and patted the chair beside her. "You look beautiful," she whispered as I sat down. I squeezed her hand gratefully. At least I wouldn't have to sit through this alone. The other people at our table were clearly fellow exiles from the main celebration. An elderly man who turned out to be Jonathan's high school math teacher. A middle-aged couple who had known Jonathan when he was young but hadn't seen him in years. We were the forgotten people, the inconvenient reminders of a past he was trying to leave behind. The ceremony began at exactly 4 o'clock. Jonathan looked handsome in his black tuxedo as he took his place at the altar, but when his eyes swept the crowd, they passed over me without acknowledgement. Catherine was breathtaking in a dress that probably cost more than my yearly salary, her veil trailing behind her like a cloud of silk and dreams. I watched my son promise to love and honor his new wife, and I felt proud despite everything. He had grown into a successful, confident man. That had been my goal all those years ago when I was working multiple jobs and sacrificing my own dreams for his future. But when the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, I found myself thinking about a different kind of objection. Not to his marriage, but to his complete erasure of the woman who had made it all possible. The reception began with cocktails in the adjacent salon. I lingered near the edges of the crowd, making polite conversation with the other members of Table 14, watching as Jonathan and Catherine worked the room like the successful young couple they were. They moved effortlessly between groups of guests, accepting congratulations and posing for photographs with Catherine's elegant parents and siblings. When they finally made their way to our corner of the room, Jonathan's smile became slightly strained. "Ma, you made it," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek with duty rather than warmth. "Of course I made it," I replied. "I wouldn't miss my son's wedding." Catherine was polite but distant, her handshake brief and cool. "Thank you for coming," she said, as if I were a distant acquaintance rather than the groom's mother. "Congratulations," I said. "I hope you'll be very happy together." "We will be," Jonathan said quickly, already looking around for their next social obligation. They moved on without another word, leaving me standing with Mrs. Lopez and feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Dinner was an elaborate affair with multiple courses served by an army of waiters who moved through the ballroom like dancers. The food was exquisite. Courses I couldn't have pronounced, prepared with ingredients I had never heard of. At the head table, Jonathan and Catherine laughed and chatted with her parents and siblings, looking perfectly at home in this world of wealth and privilege. When it came time for the toasts, Catherine's father spoke eloquently about the merger of two families, about shared values and bright futures. Jonathan's best man, a colleague from his investment firm, told amusing stories about their friendship and Jonathan's success in the financial world. No one mentioned the woman who had raised him alone, who had worked herself to exhaustion to pay for his education, who had loved him unconditionally through every stage of his life. In the official narrative of this wedding, my son had apparently sprung fully formed from the world of privilege, with no messy backstory of struggle and sacrifice to complicate the fairy tale. After dinner, there was dancing. I watched from my corner table as Jonathan and Catherine swayed together to their first song as husband and wife. Surrounded by the approving gaze of Catherine's family and friends, the photographer captured every moment, ensuring that this version of events, the sanitized, elevated version, would be preserved for posterity. Mrs. Lopez leaned over and whispered, "Would you like to dance?" I shook my head. The last thing I wanted was to draw any more attention to my presence at this celebration of my own insignificance. As the evening wore on, I found myself thinking about the years I had spent dreaming of this moment. I had imagined dancing with my son at his wedding, had pictured myself crying tears of joy as he started his new life. I had never imagined feeling like an intruder at my own child's most important day. Around 10 o'clock, I decided I had endured enough. I said goodnight to Mrs. Lopez and the other members of our exile table, then made my way toward the exit. In the lobby, I stopped to use the restroom before beginning my long journey back to Queens. As I was washing my hands, I heard Catherine's voice from one of the stalls. "Thank God that part is over," she was saying to someone, probably her sister or maid of honor. I was so worried about how Jonathan's mother would fit in with everyone else. My blood froze. "She seems nice enough," the other voice replied. "Just different." "Different is one way to put it," Catherine laughed. "Did you see that dress? And those shoes?" Jonathan was mortified. He tried to get her to buy something more appropriate, but you know how stubborn older people can be about these things. I stood perfectly still, barely breathing, as my son's new wife continued to dissect my appearance and my place in their lives. "Well, at least she was seated far enough away that she didn't show up in any of the important photos," the other voice said. "Your parents would have died if she'd been at the family table." Exactly. Jonathan handled it perfectly. I was proud of him for setting those boundaries. It shows he's really committed to our new life together. I waited until they left, then looked at myself in the ornate mirror above the marble sinks. My navy blue dress, which had seemed appropriate when I bought it, suddenly looked shabby and old-fashioned under the harsh bathroom lighting. My carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the fact that I was exactly what Catherine had implied, an embarrassment to be managed and hidden away. But as I stared at my reflection, something shifted inside me. The shame I had been carrying all evening began to transform into something else. Anger, yes, but also a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had spent my entire adult life putting my son's needs before my own. I had worked jobs I hated to pay for his education. I had sacrificed my own dreams, my own chances at happiness, my own financial security to ensure he had opportunities I could never have imagined. And this was how he repaid me, by allowing his new wife to mock me behind my back while he stood by and said nothing. I left the Pierre Hotel that night with my head held high, but my heart was in pieces. The subway ride back to Queens felt like a journey through a tunnel of humiliation and regret. Every reflection in the dark windows showed me the same thing. An old woman who had outlived her usefulness to the only person she had ever truly loved. Back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table still wearing my wedding dress, and stared at the photographs scattered across its surface. Pictures of a little boy who had once thought I was the most wonderful woman in the world. Pictures of graduations and birthdays and quiet moments of happiness that seemed to belong to someone else's life. I picked up one photograph, Jonathan at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, his arms wrapped around my neck at a Mets game where I had spent my last $20 on hot dogs and Cracker Jack. He was looking at me in that picture with absolute adoration, as if I were the source of all good things in his world. When had that changed? When had I become something he was ashamed of instead of proud of? I carried the photograph to my bedroom and set it on my nightstand, then carefully hung up my navy blue dress in the closet. It would probably never be worn again. Like me, it had served its purpose and could now be retired to obsolescence. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of my neighborhood. The elevated train carrying late-night workers home to their families. The distant sound of music from someone's open window. The hum of Mrs. Lopez's television through our shared wall. These sounds, which had comforted me for so many years, now seemed to emphasize my isolation. I was surrounded by life, by other people's connections and relationships, but I had somehow become invisible even to my own son. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to save me the last bite of his ice cream, who used to tell me he loved me every night before sleep took him away to his dreams. I woke up on Sunday morning with a decision forming in my mind like dawn breaking over the city skyline. For 38 years, I had defined myself entirely in relation to my son. I was Jonathan's mother first, last, and always. Every choice I made, every sacrifice I accepted, every dream I deferred was filtered through that identity. But if being Jonathan's mother meant accepting humiliation and disrespect, if it meant being hidden away like a dirty secret, then perhaps it was time to discover who I was beyond that relationship. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with the Sunday paper, but instead of reading the news, I found myself looking at the classified ads, community college courses for senior citizens, art classes at the local cultural center, volunteer opportunities at the botanical garden. For the first time in decades, I began to think about what I wanted to do with my life instead of what other people needed me to do. The phone rang at 11 o'clock. Jonathan's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment I hesitated before answering. "Hi, Ma." His voice sounded tired. "I wanted to thank you for coming yesterday. It meant a lot to Catherine and me that you were there." The lie was so carefully constructed that I almost admired its craftsmanship. We both knew that my presence had been an obligation rather than a joy, but he was offering me the fiction of inclusion. "It was a beautiful wedding," I said neutrally. "Catherine's parents really outdid themselves," he agreed. "The whole thing was perfect." Perfect. Yes, I suppose from his perspective it had been. His embarrassing past had been safely contained at table 14. His new life had been launched without incident, and his mother had played her assigned role without causing any scenes. Jonathan, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my own voice. I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. A pause. Okay. Are you ashamed of me? The silence stretched so long that I wondered if the call had been dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully modulated. Ma, that's not… Why would you ask that? Because yesterday felt like I was being hidden away. Because I haven't met your wife's family despite the fact that you've been engaged for 8 months. Because you changed your name to hers and never told me until afterwards. Because I'm starting to feel like you wish I would just disappear from your life entirely. That's not true, he said, but there was something hollow in his protest. Then why am I sitting alone in Queens while you build a new life in Brooklyn Heights? Why do I have to hear about your engagement party from the building gossip instead of from you? Why do I feel like a stranger to my own son? Ma, you're being dramatic. You know I love you. Do I? The question surprised both of us. Because love isn't just words, Jonathan. Love is action. Love is inclusion. Love is treating someone like they matter. You matter, he said quickly. Of course you matter. Then prove it, I said. Invite Catherine's parents to dinner at my apartment. Include me in your holiday plans. Stop acting like my existence is something you need to manage and apologize for. Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was tighter. Ma, it's complicated. Catherine's family has certain expectations. And what about my expectations? I interrupted. What about the expectations of the woman who raised you alone? Who worked herself to the bone to give you opportunities? Who never missed a single important moment in your life until you started excluding me from them? I'm not excluding you. Yes, you are. The words came out stronger than I had intended, but they felt true and necessary. You're ashamed of where you came from, and by extension, you're ashamed of me, and I'm tired of pretending that's okay. Ma, please. Let's not do this over the phone. When then? I asked. When will we have this conversation? When will you acknowledge that your mother exists and deserves basic respect? I respect you, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. No, you don't. You manage me. You contain me. You dole out just enough attention to keep me from making a scene, but you don't respect me. If you respected me, I would have been at the family table yesterday. If you respected me, I would have met your wife before the wedding. If you respected me, you wouldn't have changed your name without telling me. I could hear him sighing on the other end of the line, and I knew that sigh. It was his difficult mother sigh, the one that meant he was already mentally drafting the conversation he would have with Catherine about my unreasonable demands. I need to think about what you're saying, he said finally. Good, I replied. Think about it. And while you're thinking, I'm going to do some thinking of my own about what kind of relationship I want to have with someone who treats me like an inconvenience. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. In 38 years of motherhood, I had never spoken to my son like that. I had never demanded respect or set boundaries or suggested that his behavior toward me was unacceptable. The phone rang again immediately, but I didn't answer. Whatever Jonathan wanted to say in response could wait. I had waited long enough for him to recognize my worth. Now it was his turn to wait. Over the next several days, I found myself thinking constantly about our conversation. I replayed every word, analyzed every tone, wondered if I had been too harsh or not harsh enough. Part of me wanted to call him back and apologize, to return to our familiar pattern of me accepting whatever scraps of attention he was willing to offer. But another part of me, a part that had been buried under decades of selfless motherhood, was tired of apologizing for my existence. On Wednesday, Mrs. Lopez knocked on my door with a pot of arroz con pollo and a bottle of wine. You look like you need company, she said simply. Over dinner, I told her about the wedding, about the conversation with Jonathan, about the growing realization that I had somehow become invisible in my own son's life. Ay, mija, she said, refilling my wine glass. You raised a successful man. You should be proud. I am proud, I said. But pride isn't enough anymore. I want respect. I want inclusion. I want to feel like I matter to the person I love most in the world. And if he can't give you those things? I stared into my wine, watching the ruby liquid catch the light from my overhead fixture. Then I need to figure out how to matter to myself. Mrs. Lopez nodded approvingly. Now you're talking like a woman who knows her worth. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went somewhere just because I wanted to go. The Queen's Botanical Garden was hosting a spring flower show, and instead of spending Saturday cleaning my apartment and waiting for Jonathan to call, I bought a ticket and wandered through the displays of tulips and daffodils. The colors were so vivid they almost hurt to look at. Bright yellow and deep purple and soft pink, all arranged in patterns that seemed to celebrate life itself. I sat on a bench near the rose garden and watched families with small children pointing excitedly at the flowers, and I remembered bringing Jonathan to this same garden when he was little. He had been fascinated by the butterflies, chasing them from flower to flower while I followed behind with his juice box and animal crackers. Such a simple day, but so full of joy and connection. When had we stopped having simple days together? On my way out, I stopped at the gift shop and bought a small potted orchid, something beautiful to put in my kitchen window, something that would bloom for me and me alone. Back in my apartment, I placed the orchid on the windowsill and stepped back to admire it. The apartment suddenly looked different with this splash of color, this living thing that required my care and attention. For too long, my living space had been merely functional, a place to sleep and eat between shifts at work and visits from Jonathan. But maybe it could be more than that. Maybe it could be a place where I lived rather than just existed. That night, I called the community college and asked for information about their senior citizen continuing education programs. The woman on the phone was enthusiastic and helpful, explaining the various options available, everything from computer classes to pottery workshops to book clubs. "What interests you most?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. What did interest me? It had been so long since anyone had asked me that question that I almost didn't know how to answer. "Art, I think," I said finally. "I used to draw when I was young before life got in the way." We have a wonderful basic drawing class that meets twice a week," she said. "The instructor is very patient with beginners, and the students are all adults who are exploring their creative sides." I signed up on the spot, paying the registration fee with money from the envelope I kept hidden in my bedroom dresser, my emergency fund that had been sitting untouched for 3 years. For the first time in months, I fell asleep that night feeling excited about something. The drawing class met on Tuesday and Thursday evenings in a bright studio on the second floor of the community college's arts building. The other students were a mix of ages and backgrounds: a retired nurse, a widowed accountant, a former construction worker whose arthritis had forced him into early retirement. What we had in common was a desire to try something new, to discover parts of ourselves that had been dormant for too long. Our instructor, Maria, was a patient woman in her 50s, who encouraged us to see drawing not as a skill to be mastered, but as a way of paying attention to the world around us. "Don't worry about making it look perfect," she told us during our first session. "Worry about really seeing what you're looking at." She set up a simple still life, a ceramic vase with a few flowers, an apple, a book, and asked us to draw what we observed. I picked up my pencil with hands that trembled slightly from nervousness and began to sketch. It was harder than I had expected, translating what my eyes saw into marks on paper. But there was something meditative about the process, something that quieted the constant chatter of worry and regret in my head. For 2 hours, I thought about nothing but the curve of the vase, the way shadow fell across the apple's surface, the delicate lines of the flower petals. When I looked around the room at the end of class, I saw 8 people who were completely absorbed in their own creative process. We were all beginners, all imperfect, but we were all trying to create something that hadn't existed before we sat down with our pencils and paper. "Nice work," Maria said, looking over my shoulder at my drawing. "You have a good eye for proportion." The compliment warmed me in a way I hadn't felt in years. When was the last time someone had praised my work, had noticed something I was good at? After class, several of us went to a nearby coffee shop to continue the conversations that had started over our sketch pads. The retired nurse, Gloria, told us about her plans to travel to Italy now that her children were grown, and her husband had passed. The accountant, Bob, was learning to draw because his late wife had always encouraged him to try it. "She used to say I saw the world in numbers," he said. stirring his coffee thoughtfully. She wanted me to try seeing it in pictures instead. I found myself sharing more about my own life than I had with anyone in years. Not the sanitized version I usually presented to acquaintances, but the real story. My son's success, my pride in his achievements, my growing sense that I had become expendable in his new life. "Sounds like you raised him too well," Gloria said with a sympathetic smile. "Sometimes when we do too good a job helping them fly, they forget to look back and see where they came from. The question is," Bob added quietly, "what do you want to do about it?" I thought about that question for the rest of the week. What did I want to do about it? For so long, my strategy had been to wait patiently for Jonathan to remember that he loved me, to hope that eventually he would make room for me in his new life. But patience and hope hadn't gotten me a seat at the family table. They hadn't earned me an invitation to the engagement party. They hadn't prevented me from being discussed like an embarrassing problem in the bathroom of his wedding reception. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. The next Sunday, instead of sitting by the phone hoping Jonathan would call, I called him. "Hi, Ma," he said, and I could hear the wariness in his voice. Our last conversation had clearly unsettled him. "I have something to tell you," I said without preamble. "I'm taking an art class." That's great, Ma. Good for you. And I'm thinking about taking a trip. Mrs. Lopez and I are looking at one of those group tours. Maybe to see the fall foliage in Vermont." "Oh, okay. That sounds nice." I could hear his confusion. This wasn't how our conversations usually went. Usually I asked about his life, his work, his plans. Usually I waited for him to offer information rather than sharing my own news. "I also wanted to let you know that I won't be available to help with money anymore," I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart was racing. Silence. "What do you mean?" he asked finally. "I mean that I'm going to start spending my money on myself, on art classes and trips and things that make me happy. I won't be able to help you with down payments or emergencies or investments anymore." "Ma, I never asked you for money." "You didn't have to ask. I offered because I thought it would keep me connected to your life. But I realize now that giving you money doesn't buy me love or respect or inclusion. It just makes me feel useful temporarily while ultimately making me poorer." "I don't understand where this is coming from," he said, and for the first time in our conversation, he sounded genuinely concerned rather than just irritated. "It's coming from 38 years of putting your needs ahead of my own," I said. "It's coming from watching you build a life that doesn't include me in any meaningful way. It's coming from the realization that I've been so busy being your mother that I forgot how to be myself." "Ma, you're scaring me. This doesn't sound like you." "Maybe that's the problem," I replied. "Maybe the me you know is just the small part of myself I've been showing you. Maybe there are parts of me that have been sleeping for decades, and they're finally waking up." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen looking at the orchid on my windowsill. It had grown visibly since I brought it home, new buds forming along its delicate stem. With proper care and attention, it was going to bloom beautifully, just like me. Over the next few weeks, my life began to change in small but significant ways. I signed up for the Vermont foliage tour with Mrs. Lopez. I bought art supplies and set up a small studio corner in my living room. I started reading books I had always meant to read but never had time for. Most importantly, I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. Jonathan called several times during this period, his voice increasingly strained as he tried to figure out what was happening to his predictably available mother. I was polite but distant, sharing news of my activities but not asking detailed questions about his life or offering unsolicited advice or assistance. "Are you angry with me?" he asked during one of these calls. "No," I said, and I meant it. "I'm not angry. I'm just busy." Busy with what? Living my own life. The art class became the highlight of my weeks. My drawing skills improved slowly but steadily, and more importantly, I discovered that I had forgotten how much I enjoyed the process of creating something beautiful. Maria encouraged us to experiment with different subjects, and I found myself drawn to portraits, faces that told stories of lives fully lived. One Tuesday evening, she brought in a collection of old photographs for us to practice with. As I shuffled through them, one image stopped me cold. It was a picture of an elderly woman, probably in her 70s, sitting on a front porch with a slight smile. Her clothes were simple. Her hands showed the wear of a working life, but her eyes were bright with intelligence and warmth. She looked like me, or rather, like who I could become if I stopped apologizing for my existence. I spent that entire class session drawing her portrait, trying to capture not just her features, but the quality of contentment I saw in her expression. When Maria looked at my work at the end of the evening, she was quiet for a long moment. "This is really beautiful," she said finally. "There's something about the way you've captured her dignity. She looks like someone who knows exactly who she is and is completely comfortable with that knowledge." Dignity. The word stayed with me as I rode the subway home. When was the last time I had felt dignified? When was the last time I had felt completely comfortable with who I was? The answer was painful, but clarifying. Not since Jonathan had started treating me like an embarrassment to be managed. That night, I called him. "Ma?" He sounded surprised. I usually waited for him to call me these days. "I want to invite you and Catherine to dinner," I said. "Oh? Well, we're pretty busy right now with work and settling into the new apartment. Next Sunday at noon," I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "I'm making my arroz con pollo, the recipe your grandmother taught me." "Ma, I told you, we're really busy." "Then unbusy yourselves for 2 hours," I said firmly. "I'm your mother. I've never asked to meet your wife properly, never asked to see where you live, never asked to be included in your new life. But I'm asking now, next Sunday at noon. I don't think Catherine would be comfortable." "Then it's time for Catherine to get uncomfortable," I interrupted. "Because I'm done being the only one who has to adjust and accommodate and make sacrifices. If she wants to be part of this family, she needs to actually meet the family." "Ma, next Sunday at noon, Jonathan. Don't make me wonder if I raised a son who would be too ashamed of his mother to share a meal with her." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I had never spoken to him like that before, never made demands or issued ultimatums. But something had shifted inside me during these weeks of art classes and self-discovery. I was remembering what it felt like to have expectations, to believe I deserved respect and consideration. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of October day that made my apartment feel especially cozy. I spent the morning cooking, filling my small kitchen with the familiar aromas of garlic and sofrito and saffron. The arroz con pollo was one of the few recipes I had learned from my own mother before she died, and making it always connected me to the long line of strong women who had come before me. At 11:30, my buzzer rang. I pressed the intercom button with a mixture of nervousness and pride. "It's Jonathan." His voice crackled through the old speaker system. "Come up," I said, and buzzed them in. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find my son standing in the hallway with a tall, elegant blonde woman who must be Catherine. She was even more beautiful than she had appeared at the wedding, her perfect makeup and carefully styled hair making my small apartment feel shabby by comparison. "Hi, Ma," Jonathan said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. His embrace was stilted, uncomfortable. "Catherine," I said, extending my hand to my daughter-in-law. "It's nice to finally meet you properly." "Thank you for having us," she replied, her handshake brief and cool. Her eyes swept over my apartment, taking in the modest furnishings, the art supplies in the corner, the orchid blooming on the windowsill. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing toward my small dining table, which I had set with my good dishes, the ones that had been wedding gifts when I married Jonathan's father 39 years ago. They sat stiffly, clearly uncomfortable but trying to be polite. Catherine's designer handbag, which probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months, looked out of place next to my vinyl tablecloth. "This smells amazing," Jonathan said, and for a moment his smile was genuine. "I haven't had your arroz con pollo in years." "I know," I said simply. "That's why I made it today." I served them generous portions, along with sweet plantains and black beans, and for a few minutes we ate in silence. Whatever else had changed between us, Jonathan still loved my cooking. I watched him take seconds, saw the way his shoulders relaxed slightly as familiar flavors brought back childhood memories. "This is delicious," Catherine admitted reluctantly. "Jonathan told me you were a good cook, but this is really exceptional. My mother taught me," I said. "She came from Puerto Rico when she was 18. worked as a seamstress in the garment district. She said that knowing how to cook meant you could always take care of the people you loved, no matter how little money you had. Catherine nodded politely, but I could see her discomfort with this reference to working-class origins. "So," I said, setting down my fork and looking directly at my son, "tell me about your new apartment." Jonathan brightened, clearly relieved to move to safer conversational territory. He described their place in Brooklyn Heights, the high ceilings, the view of the harbor, the renovated kitchen with its marble countertops and stainless steel appliances. "You should come see it sometime," he said. But the invitation was clearly automatic rather than genuine. "I'd like that," I said. "When?" He blinked, caught off guard by my directness. "Well, we're still getting settled. Next weekend?" I suggested pleasantly. Catherine and Jonathan exchanged a quick glance. "Actually," Catherine said carefully, "we're having Jonathan's colleagues over for a dinner party next Saturday. It's sort of a work thing." "I see," I said. "And the Sunday after that?" Another pause. "We usually go to brunch with my parents on Sundays," Catherine explained. "Every Sunday?" I asked. "Most Sundays," she admitted. I nodded slowly, understanding perfectly. There was room in their schedule for her parents, for his colleagues, for their social obligations, but there wasn't room for me. "Jonathan," I said quietly, "do you remember when you were 8 and you had pneumonia?" He looked puzzled by the change of subject. "Sort of, I guess. You were sick for almost 2 weeks. High fever, terrible cough. I slept in the chair next to your bed every night because I was afraid to leave you alone. I missed so much work that I nearly lost my job, but I didn't care. You were the most important thing in my world." "Ma, where are you going with this?" "I'm going to the place where I ask you when I became unimportant," I said. "When did I go from being the person who would sacrifice anything for you to being the person you don't have time to see? When did I become someone you're ashamed to introduce to your colleagues at dinner parties?" "I'm not ashamed of you," he said quickly. "Then why am I not part of your life?" I asked. "Why do I have to beg for an invitation to see where you live? Why did I find out about your engagement party from the building gossip instead of from you?" Catherine was staring at her plate, clearly wishing she could disappear. "Ma, it's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple," I interrupted. "Either I matter to you, or I don't. Either I'm your family, or I'm not. Either you're proud of me, or you're ashamed of me. There's no middle ground here." "Of course you matter," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then prove it," I said. "Make room for me in your life. Include me in your plans. Treat me like someone you love instead of someone you tolerate." The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Catherine cleared her throat. "I think maybe we should go," she said softly. "Yes," I agreed. "I think you should." They left quickly, Jonathan mumbling something about calling me later, Catherine offering polite but meaningless thanks for lunch. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, my heart pounding with a mixture of sadness and relief. I had finally said what needed to be said. I had asked for what I deserved, and their response had told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in their priorities. That evening, Mrs. Lopez knocked on my door with a bottle of wine and a sympathetic expression. "How did it go?" she asked. "About as well as I expected," I said, opening the bottle and pouring us each a glass. "They came, they ate, they made it clear that there's no real place for me in their life. I'm sorry, mija." "Don't be," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. At least now I know where I stand. At least now I can stop wondering and hoping and making excuses for them. We sat on my fire escape, looking out over the familiar streets of Queens while the sun set behind the Manhattan skyline. The neighborhood was alive with the sounds of families sharing Sunday dinner, children playing in the courtyard, teenagers walking home from dates. "So what now?" Mrs. Lopez asked. "Now I figure out how to be happy without them," I said. "Now I learn how to live for myself instead of for someone who doesn't want me around." It was a terrifying prospect, but also strangely liberating. For the first time in decades, my happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval or inclusion. I was free to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to be the perfect mother to an ungrateful son. Jonathan didn't call that evening, or the next day, or the day after that. The silence confirmed what I had already known. He was relieved to have an excuse to push me even further to the margins of his life. But instead of sitting by the phone waiting and hoping, I went to my art class. I visited the botanical garden. I had coffee with Bob and Gloria and the other students from drawing class. I started planning the Vermont trip with Mrs. Lopez. 2 weeks later, I was working on a still life in my living room when my phone rang. Jonathan's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment, I considered not answering. But curiosity won out. "Hi, Ma," he said, his voice careful and formal. "Hello, Jonathan. I wanted to apologize for how lunch went the other Sunday. Catherine and I both felt bad about leaving so abruptly." "No need to apologize," I said. "You answered my questions very clearly." "What do you mean?" "I asked if I mattered to you, and you showed me that I don't. At least not enough to make any room for me in your life. That's valuable information." "Ma, that's not true." "Jonathan," I said gently, "it's okay. I understand now. You've built a life that doesn't include me, and that's your choice. I can't force you to want a relationship with me. I do want a relationship with you," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "No, you want the idea of a relationship with me. You want to be able to tell people you love your mother without actually having to spend time with her or include her in anything important. You want the emotional credit without doing any of the work." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "I don't know how to fix this," he said finally, and for the first time in our conversation, he sounded genuinely distressed. "You can't fix it," I said. "Not unless you actually want to change how you treat me. And I don't think you do. I think you want me to go back to being grateful for whatever scraps of attention you throw my way. That's not fair." "Fair?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Jonathan, I spent 38 years being fair. I was fair when you were embarrassed by our apartment. I was fair when you stopped calling. I was fair when you excluded me from your engagement party. I was fair when you seated me behind a pillar at your wedding so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of Catherine's family. I'm tired of being fair. Ma, I love you," I continued. "I will always love you, but I won't continue to accept crumbs from your table while pretending to be grateful. I deserve better than that. And if you can't see that, then that's your loss, not mine." I hung up before he could respond. My hands steady despite the way my heart was breaking. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Finally admitting that my son might never become the man I had raised him to be. The man who would love and respect the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. But it was also the most liberating thing I had ever done. For the first time in decades, I was telling the truth about what I needed and deserved, instead of making excuses for someone else's inability to provide it. The next day, I did something I had been thinking about for weeks. I went to the bank and opened a new savings account, one that Jonathan didn't know about. I transferred the money I had been keeping in my emergency fund, money I had always told myself was for helping him if he ever needed it, into the new account. This money was for me now, for art classes and trips and whatever else might make me happy in the years I had left. I was done financing my own marginalization. That weekend, Mrs. Lopez and I took the train to Vermont for our foliage tour. It was my first real vacation in over 20 years, and I felt like a teenager playing hooky from school. The other people on the tour were friendly retirees, couples and single women like myself, who had decided it was time to start living for themselves. The mountains were spectacular in their autumn glory. Brilliant reds and golds and oranges that looked almost too perfect to be real. We stayed in a charming bed and breakfast where the owner made elaborate breakfasts and encouraged guests to sit by the fireplace in the evening sharing stories and dreams. On our second night, I found myself telling a group of fellow travelers about my situation with Jonathan. I hadn't planned to share such personal details with strangers, but something about the cozy atmosphere and the wine we'd had with dinner loosened my tongue. I raised him to be successful, I concluded. And he is successful. I just didn't expect that his success would mean leaving me behind. "Honey," said a woman named Ruth from Baltimore, "that says more about him than it does about you. A real man doesn't forget where he came from." "Maybe," said Margaret from Phoenix. "But the question is, what are you going to do about it now? Are you going to spend the rest of your life waiting for him to realize what he's lost? Or are you going to build a life that makes you happy whether he's in it or not?" I thought about Margaret's question for the rest of the trip. What kind of life did I want to build for myself? For so long, my identity had been entirely wrapped up in being Jonathan's mother that I had forgotten I was anything else. But these past few months had shown me glimpses of who I could be. I was someone who could learn to draw, who could make friends, who could travel and try new things and find joy in unexpected places. I was someone who deserved respect and consideration and love that didn't come with conditions. When I returned to Queens, my apartment felt different, smaller but also cozier. Instead of a place where I waited for other people to call or visit, it was becoming a place where I lived fully and independently. I hung up my sketches from art class, bought bright curtains for my living room windows, and set up a reading corner with a comfortable chair and good lighting. Jonathan called twice while I was in Vermont, leaving messages that I didn't return until I was ready. When I finally called him back, he sounded angry. "I was worried about you," he said. "You disappeared without telling anyone where you were going." "I told Mrs. Lopez," I said calmly, "and I mentioned the trip to you several weeks ago. I didn't know you were serious about actually going." "Why wouldn't I be serious? I'm a grown woman who can travel wherever I want to travel." "I know that, but you've never done anything like this before." "I've never had the money to do anything like this before," I corrected him. "I always spent my extra money on you." He was quiet for a moment. "Ma, if you needed money for a trip, you could have asked me." "No," I said firmly. "I'm done asking you for anything, and I'm done giving you anything too. From now on, I'm spending my money and my time on people who actually want me around." "I want you around," he protested, but it sounded hollow. "When was the last time you invited me to anything?" I asked. "When was the last time you called just to talk? When was the last time you treated me like someone you enjoy spending time with instead of someone you're obligated to tolerate?" The silence told me everything I needed to know. "I'm not angry with you anymore, Jonathan," I said, and I meant it. "I'm just done waiting for you to decide I'm worth your time." 3 months passed. I threw myself into my art classes with new intensity, discovering that what had started as a hobby was becoming a genuine passion. Maria encouraged me to enter some of my portraits in a local community art show, and to my amazement, one of them won 3rd place in the amateur division. The winning piece was a portrait I had painted of Mrs. Lopez. I had captured her sitting on our fire escape during one of our evening wine sessions, the setting sun casting golden light across her face. Her expression was one of contentment mixed with wisdom, the look of a woman who had lived fully and learned to find joy in simple pleasures. "You really see people," Maria told me after the awards ceremony. "There's something about the way you paint faces that shows their inner strength." Inner strength. I liked that phrase. It described something I was discovering about myself, something I had perhaps always possessed but had never recognized. The holidays came and went with minimal contact from Jonathan. He called on Thanksgiving to see if I wanted to come to dinner at Catherine's parents' house in Westchester. "They have a beautiful home," he said. "Very traditional Thanksgiving. Catherine's mother sets a gorgeous table." "That's nice," I said. "Mrs. Lopez and I are cooking together this year. We're trying some new recipes." "Oh," he sounded surprised. "Well, maybe Christmas then?" "Maybe," I said noncommittally. In the end, Mrs. Lopez and I spent both holidays together, along with Bob from our art class and a few other friends we had made. Our celebrations were simple but warm, filled with laughter and genuine affection. No one was performing for anyone else or trying to impress. We were just people who enjoyed each other's company, sharing good food and good conversation. It was the happiest holiday season I had had in years. In January, something unexpected happened. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Catherine, shopping alone in the produce section. She looked tired and stressed, very different from the polished perfection she usually projected. "Oh," she said when she saw me. "Hi." "Hello, Catherine," I said politely. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, surrounded by pyramids of winter vegetables. "How are you?" she asked finally. "I'm well, thank you." "How are you and Jonathan settling into married life?" She shrugged. "It's an adjustment. Marriage is harder than I expected." I nodded sympathetically but didn't offer advice or ask probing questions. That wasn't my role anymore. "Jonathan seems different lately," she said, apparently needing to talk to someone. "More distant. He works all the time, and when he's home, he's distracted." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want my son to be unhappy. He talks about you sometimes, she said quietly. About when he was growing up. He has a lot of good memories. I'm glad, I said. Those were good years. I think he misses you, she admitted. I think maybe we handled things wrong. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from her, and I appreciated the admission. Catherine, I said gently, I don't want to cause problems in your marriage, but I also can't pretend that being excluded and dismissed doesn't hurt. Jonathan is my only child. He's the most important person in my world, even if I'm not important in his. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I never had to share him before. My parents, they always came first in everything. I didn't know how to make room for someone else. Someone else, I repeated softly. That's how you see me? As someone else? No, she said quickly. That's not what I meant. I meant I didn't know how to share him with his past, with the life he had before me. I'm not his past, I said. I'm his mother. I'll always be his mother, whether he acknowledges me or not. We parted ways in the produce aisle, but something had shifted in that brief conversation. For the first time, I had seen Catherine as a real person, rather than just the woman who had taken my son away. She was young and insecure, trying to build a marriage with someone who was carrying unresolved feelings about his family. That didn't excuse the way I had been treated, but it helped me understand it better. A week later, Jonathan called. Ma, I was wondering if you'd like to have lunch, he said. Just the two of us. There are some things I'd like to talk about. That would be nice, I said, genuinely surprised. We met at a small Italian restaurant in Manhattan, halfway between his office and my apartment. He looked tired when he arrived, older somehow than he had just a few months earlier. Thanks for coming, he said, attempting a smile. I wasn't sure you would. I'm curious about what you want to talk about, I admitted. He ordered wine for both of us, then sat back in his chair and studied my face. You look different, he said finally. Happier, maybe? I am happier, I said simply. Even though things have been difficult between us. Because things have been difficult between us, I corrected him. Because I finally stopped waiting for you to decide I was worth your time. He flinched at the directness of my response. Ma, I want to apologize, he said. Catherine and I have been talking, and we realized we've been unfair to you. Yes, you have, I agreed. I think I got caught up in trying to fit into Catherine's world, and I lost sight of where I came from, of who raised me. You didn't lose sight of it, I said. You were ashamed of it. There's a difference. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his wine glass. You're right, he said finally. I was ashamed. Not of you, exactly, but of being poor, of growing up the way we did, of having to work so hard for things that came easily to Catherine's family. And you thought pretending I didn't exist would somehow erase that history? I thought if I could keep the two worlds separate, if I could present myself as someone who belonged in Catherine's world, then maybe I could become that person for real. And how did that work out for you? I asked. His smile was rueful. Not very well. Turns out you can't build a life on lies, even small ones, even lies of omission. No, you can't. Catherine loves me, he said. But she fell in love with a version of me that isn't completely real. A version that doesn't include the most important relationship in my life. Had. I corrected him quietly. The most important relationship you had in your life. He looked up at me sharply. Had? Jonathan, you can't treat someone terribly for months and then expect one lunch to fix everything. You can't exclude someone from every important moment in your life and then decide you want them back when it's convenient. Ma, please. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But you're my mother. That has to count for something. Being your mother counted for something when I was working 2 jobs to pay for your education. It counted for something when I was sewing your torn clothes and helping you with your homework and cheering at your graduation. But it didn't count for anything when you were planning your wedding or when you were deciding who to include in your new life. I want to fix this, he said desperately. Tell me how to fix this. I looked at my son. This successful, handsome man who had somehow become a stranger, and felt something inside me that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't anger either. It was something closer to sadness for what we had both lost. "I don't think you can fix it," I said gently. "Not all the way. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal completely. But if you really want to try, you can start by including me in your life instead of managing me from the margins of it." "What does that mean, practically?" "It means inviting me to your home. It means remembering my birthday and calling on holidays. It means treating me like family instead of like an obligation. It means making room for me in your life even if I don't fit perfectly into Catherine's world." He nodded slowly. "I can do that. I want to do that. And it means accepting that I have a life of my own now," I continued. "I'm not going to sit around waiting for your phone calls anymore. I'm not going to be available whenever you suddenly remember I exist. I have friends and activities and interests that don't revolve around you." "I understand." "Do you? Because for 38 years, I defined myself entirely as your mother. But these past few months have taught me that I'm other things too. I'm Maria's student, and Mrs. Lopez's friend, and someone who's learning to paint and travel and live for herself. If you want to be part of my life, you'll have to respect all of those parts of me." We finished our lunch with a tentative agreement to try again. He would invite me to dinner at their apartment the following weekend. He would make an effort to call regularly, not just when he needed something or felt guilty about neglecting me. He would try to help Catherine understand that accepting me didn't mean diminishing her importance in his life. But as I rode the subway back to Queens that afternoon, I found myself feeling cautiously optimistic rather than genuinely hopeful. Words were easy. Actions would be harder. And I had learned to protect my heart better than I used to. The dinner at their Brooklyn Heights apartment went better than I had expected. Catherine had clearly made an effort, cooking a meal herself rather than ordering from the expensive restaurants they usually frequented. The conversation was stilted at first, but gradually became more natural as we found safe topics to discuss. My art classes, their work, the neighborhood they lived in. Their apartment was beautiful, filled with expensive furniture and artwork that spoke of good taste and abundant resources. But it felt sterile somehow, like a magazine photo rather than a home where people actually lived. "This is lovely," I said, admiring the view of the harbor from their living room windows. "Thank you," Catherine said. "We're still decorating. It's taking forever to find pieces that work with the space." I nodded politely, though privately I thought about my small apartment with its mismatched furniture and art supplies scattered in the corner. It might not be magazine-worthy, but it felt alive in a way this perfect space did not. Jonathan showed me around the apartment with obvious pride, pointing out the renovated kitchen and the master bedroom with its walk-in closet full of Catherine's designer clothes. I made appropriate, appreciative sounds while thinking about how much money was represented in this single space, more than I had earned in years of cleaning office buildings. But I also noticed things that Jonathan probably didn't see. The way Catherine tensed whenever he mentioned his work, the absence of any photographs or mementos from his childhood, the careful distance she maintained from physical affection, as if she were performing the role of loving wife rather than actually feeling it. This young woman was beautiful and educated and wealthy, but she wasn't happy, and neither, despite his success and his carefully curated life, was my son. Over the following weeks, Jonathan made good on his promise to call more frequently. Our conversations were careful at first, both of us testing the boundaries of this new relationship we were trying to build. He told me about his work, deals involving stocks and cryptocurrency that generated enormous profits for his clients and substantial bonuses for him. I told him about my art classes and the friends I was making. "You sound different when you talk about your painting," he said during one of these calls. "Different how?" "Happy. Really happy. Not just polite happy." "I am happy," I said. "It's nice to discover you're good at something new." "I'm glad, Ma. You deserve to be happy." The words were simple, but they meant more to me than any of his previous attempts at reconciliation. For the first time in years, he was seeing me as a person with my own needs and desires, not just as an extension of himself. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came an unexpected opportunity. Maria told our art class about a program that would allow amateur artists to display their work in a local gallery for a month. "It's not a big commercial gallery," she explained. But it's a legitimate show, and it's a chance for people to see your work. I submitted 3 portraits, the one of Mrs. Lopez that had won the prize, one of Bob from our coffee shop conversations, and a self-portrait I had painted using a mirror in my bedroom. The gallery accepted all 3. The opening reception was on a Thursday evening in April. Mrs. Lopez came, of course, along with Bob and Gloria, and several other friends from the community college. I had invited Jonathan as well, not really expecting him to come. But he did come, arriving at the gallery with Catherine just as I was talking to a woman who was interested in commissioning a portrait of her late husband. "Ma," he said, approaching our conversation with obvious nervousness. This is incredible." I excused myself from the potential customer and turned to my son. He was staring at the 3 portraits hanging on the far wall, his expression one of genuine amazement. "I had no idea you were this talented," he said. "Neither did I admitted. "Sometimes you don't know what you're capable of until you try." Catherine was studying the self-portrait with careful attention. In it, I had painted myself sitting by my kitchen window, the orchid on the sill beside me, morning light casting shadows across my face. My expression was serene but determined. The face of a woman who had learned to value herself. "This is really beautiful," she said quietly. "You've captured something. I don't know how to describe it. Strength, maybe? Dignity?" "Thank you," I said, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. We spent the next hour walking through the gallery, looking at the other artists' work, and talking about technique and inspiration. Jonathan asked informed questions about my process, showing genuine interest in something that had nothing to do with him or his success. As the evening wound down, he pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you, Ma," he said, "not just for the paintings, but for everything. For building this life for yourself, for not letting my mistakes stop you from becoming who you're meant to be." "Thank you," I said, tears gathering in my eyes. "That means more to me than you know." "I know I don't have the right to ask this," he continued, "but I hope you'll keep trying with me, with us. I know I have a lot to make up for, but I want to be part of this version of your life, the happy version." I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He was still the successful businessman in his expensive suit, but there was something different about him, something softer, more vulnerable, something that reminded me of the boy he used to be. "I'd like that too," I said. The months that followed weren't perfect. Trust, as I had warned Jonathan, doesn't heal easily or completely. There were still awkward moments, still conversations where I could feel him editing himself to avoid topics that might highlight our different backgrounds. But there were also genuine moments of connection. He started coming to Queens occasionally, eating dinner in my small apartment and admiring my latest paintings. He remembered my birthday for the first time in 3 years, taking me to lunch at a restaurant he chose specifically because he thought I would like it, rather than because it impressed him. Catherine remained more distant, but she made efforts too. She asked thoughtful questions about my art and listened patiently to my stories about the community college classes. Most importantly, she stopped treating me like an embarrassing secret to be managed. The real test came in the fall, when Jonathan called to ask if I would like to join them for Thanksgiving at Catherine's parents' house. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Will I fit in with their crowd?" "Ma," he said firmly, "I don't care if you fit in with their crowd. I care that you're there with me. Besides, Catherine's parents want to meet you. Properly, this time." The dinner was held at an elegant home in Westchester County, with formally set tables and multiple courses served by hired waitstaff. I wore my best dress, not the navy blue one from the wedding, which I had donated to charity, but a new burgundy dress I had bought for special occasions. Catherine's parents were polite and welcoming, asking interested questions about my art and my life in Queens. Her father, who had built his hotel business from a single property into a chain, seemed particularly interested in my work history. "You raised a remarkable young man," he told me during cocktails. "Jonathan has told us so much about you." I smiled, remembering a time when Jonathan wouldn't have told them anything about me at all. The highlight of the evening came when Catherine's mother asked to see photos of my paintings on my phone. I showed her several recent portraits, and she studied them with the attention of someone who genuinely appreciated art. "These are extraordinary," she said. "You have a real gift for capturing character. Have you considered pursuing this professionally?" "Professionally?" I laughed. "I'm 62 years old. Isn't it a little late to start a new career?" "Nonsense," she replied briskly. "My mother didn't start painting until she was 70, and she ended up having shows in galleries throughout Vermont. Age doesn't matter if you have talent, and you clearly do." Later, as Jonathan drove me back to Queens, he was quiet for most of the trip. "That went well," I said finally. "Better than well," he replied. "Catherine's mother doesn't praise lightly. If she says you have professional talent, you probably do." "Your wife's family is very nice," I said. "Very welcoming." "They are now," he said with a rueful smile. It helped that Catherine and I finally told them the truth about where I came from, instead of letting them assume I grew up with all the advantages they did. And how did that go over? Better than I expected. Catherine's father actually seemed to respect me more for having worked my way up, rather than having everything handed to me. We pulled up in front of my building, but Jonathan didn't immediately unlock the doors. "Ma, I need to tell you something," he said. "These past few months, watching you build this new life, seeing you happy and independent and following your dreams, it's made me realize something." "What's that?" "I spent so much time being ashamed of where I came from that I forgot to be proud of what you accomplished. You raised a son by yourself while working multiple jobs. You sacrificed your own opportunities to give me mine. You never gave up on me even when I gave up on you. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." "I am proud of it," I said softly. "I'm proud of both of us. Of who we were then and who we're becoming now." "I love you, Ma," he said. And for the first time in years, it sounded like a statement of fact rather than an obligation. "I love you too, mijo," I replied, using the endearment I hadn't used in months. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment that night, I reflected on how much had changed in the span of a single year. I had gone from being a woman whose entire identity revolved around being needed by someone who didn't want to need me, to being a woman with her own friends and interests and dreams. The relationship with Jonathan wasn't back to what it had been when he was young. Too much had happened for that kind of complete restoration. But it was something new and potentially stronger, built on mutual respect rather than duty and dependency. Mrs. Lopez was waiting on our shared fire escape when I got home, 2 glasses of wine already poured. "How was dinner with the fancy people?" she asked with a grin. "Good," I said, settling into my chair and accepting the wine. "Really good, actually." "And Jonathan?" "Better. We're both better." We sat in comfortable silence, looking out over the familiar streets of Queens. The apartment buildings were lit up like advent calendars, each window revealing glimpses of other lives. Families having late dinners, children doing homework, couples watching television together. "You know what I realized tonight?" I said finally. "What's that?" "I spent so many years waiting for Jonathan to invite me into his life that I forgot I could build a life of my own. A life that was full and meaningful, whether he was part of it or not. And that's when he started wanting to be part of it again," Mrs. Lopez observed wisely. "Exactly. Funny how that works." "Not so funny," she said. "Makes perfect sense. Nobody wants to join a pity party, but everybody wants to be around someone who's truly happy." I thought about that as I prepared for bed later. Had Jonathan returned to my life because I had finally learned to live without needing him to validate my existence? Had I only become worthy of love when I stopped begging for it? Perhaps. But it didn't matter now. What mattered was that I had discovered I was complete with or without his approval. And that discovery had transformed not just me, but our relationship as well. 6 months later, I was selected for a solo show at a larger gallery in Manhattan, my first real exhibition as a professional artist. The invitation came after a collector saw my work at the community college show and purchased 2 pieces, leading to other sales, and eventually to this opportunity. Jonathan and Catherine were among the first people I called with the news. "Ma, that's incredible!" Jonathan shouted into the phone, loud enough that I had to hold the receiver away from my ear. "When is the opening?" "We'll be there, of course." "Of course," he said, as if there had never been any question about his attendance at important events in my life. The opening reception was everything I had dreamed it might be, crowded with people genuinely interested in art. conversations about technique and inspiration, red dots appearing next to my paintings as they sold throughout the evening. Maria was there, beaming with pride at her former student, Mrs. Lopez had bought a new dress for the occasion and held court near the entrance, telling anyone who would listen about my transformation from lonely widow to successful artist. But the moment that meant the most came when Catherine approached me near the end of the evening. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly, pulling me aside from the crowd. "For what? For taking so long to see who you really are. For being threatened by your relationship with Jonathan instead of appreciating it. For being part of the reason you were excluded from things you should have been included in. Catherine, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I was insecure and selfish, and I almost cost Jonathan the most important relationship in his life. I'm grateful that you were strong enough to demand better treatment, because it made all of us better people." "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved. "That means a great deal to me." "I hope you'll teach me to paint sometime," she said with a tentative smile. "I'd love to learn from someone so talented." Looking at Catherine, really looking at her, I saw not the privileged young woman who had stolen my son, but a person trying to grow beyond her own limitations and insecurities. We all have moments of becoming, I realized. Mine had just taken longer than most. As the evening wound down and the last visitors left the gallery, I stood before my paintings one final time. Each portrait told a story. Some of people I knew well, some of strangers who had caught my attention, all of them captured in moments of dignity and quiet strength. Jonathan appeared beside me, studying a portrait I had painted of an elderly woman feeding pigeons in a park. "She looks like someone with stories to tell," he said. "Everyone has stories," I replied. "You just have to pay attention long enough to see them." "I'm sorry it took me so long to pay attention to yours," he said quietly. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "The important thing is that you're paying attention now." As we left the gallery together, Jonathan, Catherine, Mrs. Lopez, and me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just happiness, but profound contentment. The kind that comes from knowing that you are valued for who you truly are, not just for what you can provide to others. My story isn't a fairy tale with a perfect ending. There are still moments of awkwardness between Catherine and me. Still conversations with Jonathan where I can feel the echoes of our difficult year. Trust, once broken, leaves scars that never completely fade. But it's a story about the power of refusing to accept being treated as less than you deserve. It's about discovering that you can be complete and happy and fulfilled even when the most important relationships in your life are imperfect. It's about learning that love without respect is not love at all, but dependency disguised as affection. Most importantly, it's about the extraordinary things that can happen when you stop waiting for other people to give you permission to live your own life. 6 months ago, I was a woman who defined herself entirely by her relationship to her son, accepting whatever scraps of attention he chose to throw my way. Today, I am Maria's star pupil, Mrs. Lopez's dearest friend, the artist whose portraits hang in Manhattan galleries, the woman who travels and laughs and dreams without asking anyone's permission. I am still Jonathan's mother, but that's no longer the only thing I am. And that, I think, has made all the difference. Have you ever felt invisible in the life of someone you love most? Have you found yourself accepting treatment that you knew, deep down, you didn't deserve simply because you were afraid of losing that person entirely? Tell me your story in the comments below. If my journey from invisibility to independence resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these deeply personal stories, and it ensures that others who need to hear them will find their way here too. Remember, you are never too old to demand respect, too late to discover new dreams, or too alone to build a life that brings you joy. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop accepting their worst behavior and start modeling what love actually looks like. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me.